Hey guys, so in this video we're going to go over 5 of some of the most important techniques and concepts in order to succeed in Dragon Ball Legends PvP. While I definitely could go into way more detail about each item in this video, I'm going to do my best to keep this as concise as possible while still fully explaining each point. Now before we jump into the list, I think it's important to keep in mind that although Dragon Ball Legends is a mobile game, each item on this list will still take a certain degree of practice to ensure that they're being performed effectively. In terms of the type of players this is aimed at, I think players of all skill levels can benefit from most of these techniques, but I think some of the items we're going to be talking about are definitely a bit more oriented towards advanced players. Nonetheless, if you're watching this video, I expect you to have at least a basic understanding of the fundamental aspects of how combat in Dragon Ball Legends works, so if you don't, you might hear a few terms used throughout this video that are unfamiliar to you. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the first item on the list. The first item we're going to be discussing is the concept of initiating from close range. As you guys know, there are 3 zones to the map in Dragon Ball Legends: close range, mid-range, and full range. When it comes down to it, I would say that there are a lot of matches where the majority is played at close range, and so with that in mind, understanding how to initiate from close range is extremely important. I'm going to be introducing 3 different ways to initiate from close range, but before I do that, I want to discuss 3 of the most common responses by players when they find themselves in a close range situation. So number 1 is going to be repeatedly sidestepping 2+ times. Depending on the skill level of the opponent you're fighting, this is often going to be the most common response you see to a player finding themselves in close range. The reason this is so common is because close range is the most unpredictable area on the map, and therefore many players simply spam sidestep due to them panicking and frantically wanting to sidestep their opponent's attacks. The second most common response by players in close range situation is sidestepping once and then immediately attacking with an arts card. A lot of times players will sidestep while in close range, which will buy them enough time to gather their thoughts, resulting in them pressing an arts card a lot of the time in hopes that they will catch you in the middle of your sidestep. The third most common response, being in close range, is to sidestep once, pause for a second, and then sidestep again. And typically, this is a technique that more experienced players tend to do, since it counters the other player's double sidestep read, which is a fairly common strategy. So those are the 3 most common responses by players when they find themselves in a close range situation. In order to determine an effective strategy for initiating from close range, we need to think of a technique that counters as many of these responses as possible. This is where the quote-unquote jump-jump mechanic comes into play. The jump-jump mechanic means exactly how it sounds. As soon as you see the enemy jump, you jump, and then immediately queue up an arts card, preferably a strike card. By doing this simple maneuver, you're artificially delaying the timing of your character's jump with your enemy's jump, and what this does is it actually allows you to always start a combo on players who opt for repeatedly sidestepping 2+ times, or players who sidestep once and then immediately attack with an arts card. In other words, this technique counters the 2 most common responses of players being in close range. Now, what about the third response, where players sidestep once, pause, and then sidestep again? Well, unfortunately, this approach actually counters the jump-jump technique. So the way I like to handle close range sequences is I like to start with a jump-jump, and then if my opponent does actually use the third response to counter my jump-jump, then I switch to a different technique, which I'll call the quote-unquote wait-and-see technique. Now, the way this works is you simply wait until your opponent jumps, and instead of you jumping, you use an arts card instead. Because your opponent has decided to pause after their first jump, this arts card will catch them off guard since it will be in the middle of their pause. So to summarize, I would use the jump-jump technique as a default way to deal with close range situations, but if that doesn't work and your opponent is delaying their second sidestep, switch to the wait-and-see technique and reevaluate from there. Finally, there's one other technique that I want to quickly highlight, which is exactly the same as the wait-and-see technique that I already described. However, it's with melee-based special move cards instead. Now, this is an extremely effective technique to use with characters who restore their Vanish engage on special move activations such as Beast Gohan and Tag Super Saiyan 4 Goku and Vegeta. A lot of times your opponent will sidestep and queue up a card right away thinking you won't have Vanish, but if you clicked your special move right away as they jumped, your special move will override their arts card, restoring your Vanish engage and dealing some nice damage to the enemy. If your opponent decides to sidestep twice, therefore resulting in your special move card being vanished by the enemy, not to worry, as if your timing was correct, they can't perfect vanish you, which means you still be able to either follow up right away with an attack of your own, or vanish their immediate counterattack. Moving on to number 2 on the list, we're going to be discussing the concept of dropping combos. Now, I'm sure most of you know what the benefits of dropping combos are and why it's an important technique, but to quickly summarize, intentionally dropping your own combo can be a very effective and useful tool in dealing with characters who have special cover change abilities. A character's special cover change ability will obviously only activate if that character performs a cover change, which is something that you can only do in the middle of receiving a combo. So if the player attacking you drops the combo, you won't be able to cover change, and therefore the special cover change action will not activate. However, dropping combos also provides some other benefits as well, such as resetting combo compensation and giving you a bit more time to accumulate ki and cards in your hand. With that being said, there are a few tips to keep in mind while attempting to drop combos. The first tip is to always try and drop the combo by using a strike card from close range. The reason why this is important is because if the enemy you are attacking is a character that has blast armor or other effects such as Ultra Super Vegeta's unique gauge, dropping the combo with a blast card could give your opponent a split second of an opportunity to start a combo on you by using blast armor to fly through your blast arts, etc. The second tip is to try and not drop the combo while you do not have a full Vanish gauge. If you drop the combo while your Vanish gauge is not full, it becomes possible for your opponent to stay in with their current character, vanish your first arts card after you drop the combo, and then start a guaranteed combo on you from their end. If you drop the combo with a full Vanish gauge and your opponent vanishes, at least you still have an opportunity to be able to vanish them back once they attack you. The third and final tip that I'll give related to combo dropping is to always try and take full advantage of every second of time that you spend dropping the combo. To expand on this, if you decide to drop the combo, instead of just standing there for half a second doing nothing, take the opportunity to charge for a quick second to at least squeeze in as much ki recovery as possible, so that if your combo drop is successful, you can get the most out of its effect. The third item that we're going to be discussing is effective map positioning. As mentioned in the discussion of close range initiation, which was number 1 on the list, there are 3 zones to the map in Dragon Ball Legends: close range, mid range, and full range. The reason that close range is the most unpredictable area on the map is because you have no time to react to anything your opponent does. If your opponent decides to go for a strike card, there's no travel time between them clicking that card and their character being within contact range of your character. If your opponent decides to click their Rising Rush at a random time, it's completely possible that they might have caught your character in the middle of an action, which means you're completely out of luck. In Dragon Ball Legends, I have found that there is almost a direct correlation between mitigating risk and skill level. More skilled players will almost always opt to perform actions that have the lowest amount of risk involved because it allows them to remain in control of the flow of battle if they can understand and foresee what is going to happen. For this reason, I think minimizing the amount of time spent in close range is essential for being able to control the fight, because at mid-range or full range, you have much more time to gather information about what your opponent is doing, and thus you then have the ability to react appropriately. The clips that you're seeing right now do a pretty good job of showing exactly why resetting your character's position to mid or full range is a good idea. And the best analogy that I can give to describe why this is important is the same reason tennis players always return to the middle of the court after they hit a shot. You never know where the next shot is going to go, so in order to give yourself the best chance to react to whatever happens next, you always want to make sure you're in a position to be able to read the situation and react accordingly. The fourth item on the list is probably the most technical thing we're going to be discussing in this video, and that is the quote-unquote UG move. So I guess the first thing to explain is, why is it called the UG move? And the answer is because this is a technique that was widely popularized by a Japanese player whose name was Yuji. And at this point, this is a fairly old technique that I think actually first became semi-popular prior to even the 2nd year anniversary. So the fact that it's still extremely powerful even today just goes to show how effective of a technique this is. So before I explain how this technique works, I think it's important to understand why it's so effective. One of the single most common strategies in Dragon Ball Legends is to vanish a blast card from full range, switch characters, and then immediately vanish again in the hopes of you catching your opponent going for an immediate counterattack. This sequence of maneuvers has been one of the single most repeated string of actions throughout the game's history, and the goal of the UG move is to counter this sequence as well as others. As you're seeing in the clips that are playing right now, it's a pretty simple technique, as all it requires is for you to wait around half a second after using a blast card, tap, blast, or tackle, and then sidestepping. The reason this is so effective is because it actually works very similarly to the jump technique that I introduced under point 1. However, this time you are the one who is starting with the first jump instead of your opponent. Your opponent vanishes your attack, you wait a second, you sidestep, they switch characters and sidestep, but their sidestep is timed in a way that allows you to immediately catch them with an arts card, assuming your timing was correct. That's the power of this maneuver. Other than just countering that specific string of inputs, the UG move can also allow you to perfect vanish certain timed arts cards on enemy characters who don't switch out after vanishing your initial attack. I found that using the UG move after tackling results in you being able to perfect vanish a lot of follow-up arts cards, so it definitely has a lot of practical uses throughout the course of a fight. This is definitely a technique that takes some practice to master, but it's such a strong ability that I legitimately think this technique on its own can carry you to a decently high rank in PvP. The fifth and final point we're going to be discussing in this video is the perfect vanish environment and how to mitigate the risk that you get perfect vanished. So just to preface this point with a quick thought from me, I despise the perfect vanish mechanic. I think perfect vanish is the single biggest contributing factor to the passive playstyle being the most dominant way to play the game, and if you're someone who's competing in the top ranks of PvP, you have to make every single move with perfect vanish in the back of your mind. Now for this point on the list, I'm mainly going to be referring to perfect vanish as it pertains to playing the game from full range, so it more so applies to the beginning of each fight when you and your opponent are each trying to get your first combo started on the other player. A lot of times what happens is both players tend to be extremely hesitant to attack each other because they're both scared of being perfect vanished, which I think is a completely reasonable thought process. However, there are certain instances where it is quote-unquote safe to attack the enemy from long range without having to worry about perfect vanish, which is the main premise behind this item on the list. With the way Dragon Ball Legends works, you can't perform multiple actions at the same time. So with that in mind, the safest time to actually attack your opponent from long range is when they're already doing something, since at that point they'll be unable to perfect vanish you. The most common action you'll see a player take at long range is to sidestep in hopes of getting a perfect vanish, and so this is when you have your opening to attack. At high level play, you can often accumulate a bunch of Dragon Balls by clicking strike cards with Dragon Balls on them and canceling the action halfway through upon seeing your enemy sidestep. Another time where it's safe to attack at long range is directly after you see your opponent use a Tap Blast. Now the only thing to be aware of when doing this is it's still possible for your opponent to override your blast cards with long range special skill cards, special move cards, and even rising rushes if they're good enough. So at the end of the day, it's never truly safe to attack from long range with a blast card, but at least you know you won't be able to get perfect vanished if you watch your opponent sidestep first and you use your card immediately after seeing that. The last point I'll make is that strike canceling is a very common technique many players use to avoid overextending their strike cards from long range, since it's very easy to counter. If you have a special move card or a projectile special skill card, you can actually catch many players in their sidestep that they use to cancel their strike card. This is another common way to attack your opponent without having to worry about being perfect vanished because they would be in the middle of their sidestep, although it does take practice to get this down. So those were the 5 concepts and techniques that I think all Dragon Ball Legends players should know and keep in mind in order to improve effectiveness in PvP. So just to quickly recap the 5 items, we have number 1, initiating from close range, number 2, combo dropping, number 3, map positioning, number 4, the UG move, and number 5, the perfect vanish environment. So let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think about these techniques. I hope you guys all found this video helpful, and I will see you all in the next one.